Christina, good afternoon, and thank you so much for making time to share some thoughts on the works in this year's program that you are presenting at Bode Electrons. If I'm correct, there are three works that you are programming this year. What are their titles?
The titles are Streamlines 2 for Arhu and live electronics and fixed media. The second piece, the piece in the middle, is called Circulus, and that's for disc clavier, piano player on disc clavier, electronics, and visual artist. Third one is Book of Samples, Mergers, Transitions. So it's one of a series of pieces in the title Book of Samples.
I see, I see. Of the three works, the third, Book of Samples, the Mergers Transitions work, that is the youngest, the most recent completed. Am I correct?
Yes, a few weeks ago, in fact.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Especially for the symposium or not?
Among other things, for sure.
Oh, right. Well, I'm very,
Yeah,
very happy that
yeah,
we're premiering it this
yeah.
year. It hasn't
Yeah.
been performed yet, right?
No, hasn't.
Right.
This will be the first screening, as it were.
Yes, indeed. Let's speak about mergers transitions. The title. How did you arrive at this fascinating title?
Um, I have to pedal back to the title of the whole series, which is Book of Samples. And in the Book of Samples is about swatch books, which I discovered and liked very much. And those are showing samples of fabrics. They've been made for centuries, I think. And I happened upon one on archive.org called Book of Samples by Boston Library, where it resides, where it was donated to by the owner of the document. It's from 1835. It's from a Parisian fabric house called Fortin, and I fell kind of in love with these images. Each page has about 10 small so-called swatches or samples of the fabric being offered to prospective buyers, someone having curtains made, having a couch reupholstered, having a dress made, whatever. We still have them today, and they're very useful. I liked the musical connotation, not only of samples, which is maybe pretty gratuitous, but just the idea of this whole page with little bits, little worlds, often similar, because some of them are colorations of the same pattern. I also like this particular swatch book very much, as the patterns are kind of Art Deco-ish, and for 1835, that's rather unusual. So yeah, I just got this idea. I'd like to base a series of pieces on that document.
Christina, I'm very curious about this title, Book of Samples, or this series that is works that form the so-called Book of Samples. Can we speak a bit more about the entire series, please?
Yes, sure. I conceived this idea to have 3 or possibly 4 pieces, and I've already written 3. And the first is for clarinet and piano and fixed media, and then that was my first exploration of using the designs as inspirations. There is no visual element in that piece. It's a concert piece. And it's called Zero In, Zero Out. So I did have this sort of idea of, getting closer to some of these repetitive patterns, and then, as it were, zooming out. That was kind of the inspiration for that. But again, thinking about the one page of the book, so seeing all of these things, looking at them more closely, coming back out. There are a lot of prepared piano effects in the piece. Clarinet, a lot of harmonics, and at some point the clarinet player also joins in a sort of duet of prepared effects on the piano strings.
Are you going to limit the number of pieces that would form a collection of Book of Samples, or is this an open-ended project to be continued?
I thought in the beginning about 3 pieces.
Oh,
Now that there are 3 pieces, I thought might be nice to make a visual component to the second piece. And the second piece is already composed, but not yet premiered. And that's for clarinet, cello, and accordion. It's totally acoustic. And I thought that that could be a nice program if one ever could get it all in one
yes,
go. But I don't see an endless series. No, not now.
right,
No.
right. The second work on the program is titled Circulus from 2013. Um, one of the instruments that you've used in this composition is the disc clavier. Have you worked extensively with the disc clavier in the past?
Yeah, I must say I've made, well, four pieces at least for disc clavier. It was one of the first. It was the first piece that I used any kind of electronics in. It was like 1998, I think. I was still studying composition, and I learned how to use MIDI very simply with a MIDI cable from going out from the sound card and a computer straight into the disc clavier and straight from a notation program, Finale. That was my very first use of any electronic modi. But after that, I've done other ones with me standing at the piano doing live sampling and playback of samples and all kinds of other tricks and things.
Right, right. Let's continue to speak about the instruments in Circulus. So electronics, it's composed for the work is composed for disc clavier, electronics, live visuals, and installation. So what makes up the electronic component in the work?
The electronic component is twofold. One is the very basic sending a MIDI note out from the laptop to the disc clavier with MIDI cables. And then there's a second layer, and I just did that in Logic. You could do it in any sequencing program.
Right.
Then I doubled all of the notes and just made audio notes out of them. And on some of them within the same file, used plugins and kind of like an effects unit. So sometimes there are kind of reverb shadows to some of the notes that you hear. I had monitor speakers right under the disc clavier so that I could hear very well. And so the idea was at some points, not always, to merge something of the piano, acoustic piano sound and comments on it. Yeah. But another variation in the second part of that piece, Circulus, it's called Feldscore. And Feldscore is a very interesting piece. It's really kind of a minimal piece as far as the music goes. And there's an imaginary score, very cleverly, beautifully made by Carl Klump, my colleague. It's of glitch notes, which I've used quite often in making visual things. And he sort of stretched them out and had a piece of felt mounted on a piece of wood. You'll see that or if you go to the concert, you can see it very well in the second part. And it's, gosh, I think it's maybe 5 meters long. And he's got a video camera starting from left to right, recording it, and then it's projected above the artwork felt. And the length of the piece is exactly the amount of time it takes from the camera to go from the start to the finish of that. It's about 3.5 minutes. And at one point, I go to the disc clavier, and this is one of the features of disc claviers. You can make it a silent piano. Silent piano for people who don't want to listen with a headphone and be able to play in an apartment and not bother anybody. But the sound of the mechanics is quite nice, and you can, if you find a way to amplify that a bit, you get the very nice tick-tocky sounds.
So the second, am I correct when I say that circulus consists of three movements,
Correct.
Glish, Feldscore, and
Yes,
circulus?
correct.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And we've just spoken about the second of
Yeah.
these, namely Feldscore. And if I understand correctly, this introduced a visual element. So is that the live visuals component in the work that you mentioned in the title?
That's only one, because Carl Klump was my colleague. Carl Klump is a visual artist. Every movement of the three has a visual element.
I
That is
see.
what kind of the collaboration theme of the whole piece to do,
Okay.
and sort of harking back to the beginning of the 20th century when people started to make abstract video. There were a lot of like color wheels being played by
Yeah,
keyboards and
yeah,
octophonic piano by Baranov, Rossinet, and all kinds of fascinating. There's a lot of
indeed.
documentation of it. And Carl uses either the information of the MIDI notes being played, and he taps them, and they are imported into his setup. And he has made a number of very interesting instruments, hacked old video synthesizers, and they project glitch images. And the information of the MIDI notes, just the speed, in fact, informs the images which he projects. And in two of the movements in what I'm now showing, he's got a sort of stack of three very old TV screens. It's like a tower. In the third movement, he's using the same. We had two performances. In a later performance, he
Yeah.
used like a slide screen for the first movement, but this was a much better recording. You could see much more of what his work was. So we've got one from one performance and two movements from another performance.
I see, I see. Fascinating. And then the first work, the opening work to your concert, Streamlines 2. Does it follow on Streamlines 1, or is Streamlines 2 a separate composition, or how does that work?
In a way, yes, but more in the sense of that the first piece was for a Western violin with electronics, presented last year in the Bode Electrons
Yes. Yeah.
one, and this piece, which is actually earlier. I just turned the titles around. That's called poetic license, no?
Okay.
And that's also a string instrument, and it's an Erhu, Erhu, fascinating and widely used and for centuries and centuries in China. And they both use live electronics, both
Right.
pieces.
Right. Right. How do you go about conveying your musical ideas to an Erhu performer who, I'm assuming, um, would not be reading common Western notation, or how does that process work? How do you convey your musical ideas to Ma?
Well, actually, his name is Ma Jiamun, is the Erhu player. And Ma Jiamun did a complete classical training at the Shanghai
Uh-huh.
Conservatory, where
Uh-huh.
the performances were held. They have an electroacoustic music week, so he's totally trained
I
in
see.
in the Western way of notation. So that was no problem.
Uh-huh.
And I would email him uh, motives bits of the score, and he would record them very kindly and send them back. And so we'd had a sort of back and forth contact that way for a while. And then I also wanted to ask him to improvise on some of these sections. And for that, it was tricky. Maybe if one had had Zoom or more in 2009, I don't know if that was so easy to do. But in any case, I found an Erhu player who lives in Holland, who helped me very kindly, and also Jolantje de Vries, um, the violinist who plays Streamlines 1. She also helped me just with trying out improvisations on some of these motives. So who helped me here in Holland is Fang Weiling, if I'm saying it properly. She lives in Eindhoven
I see.
and
I
plays
see.
Arco.
Right. Mhm. Now, the live electronic component in this work, was this a new way of approaching electronic interface with an acoustic instrument for you, or how did you go about incorporating electronics?
Um, in a way, I actually with the disc clavier, I'd done what I spoke about, standing behind the or in front of the piano and with a MIDI controller, having information sent to the disc clavier, live sampling it, playing it back with effects and stuff. So that's kind of the same modus that I used in this piece, Streamlines 2. But here's a live player. So, and we performed it together on stage.
I see.
So that is a totally different element. Because with the disc clavier, I was kind of the controller, and
Yeah,
here we're working together. And there were a lot of spots where I would put a fermata over a bar, and the indication in the notes was a fermata means we listen to each other and we don't have to count
right,
exactly how long it
right,
takes. So
right.
there was kind of fluidity. And
I
having
see.
said that, I had two kinds of electronics. One was simply fixed media, or not a whole tape, but programming the keyboard of the laptop with samples either of the Arhu that I had selected, and the other was a controller, very tiny Korg Nano with faders, and so I could start and stop the recording zones, start and stop effects. So those were the two ways to.
I see.
Unfortunately, sometimes because this was a live recording, the electronics is at some spots I find too low, unfortunately. But
Right,
yeah.
right. And then finally, experimental imagery. What imagery did you use in Streamlines 2?
Actually, it's thanks to you, Theo. So thank you so very much. No, really, it's something that I sort of decided to try with the Bode Electrons 2021 online festival, because I had two pieces with no video recordings, and I decided not that it can be fine to listen to something without looking at something. We used to do it all the time on the CDs and the radio. But just joking. No, I thought, yeah, I'd like to try just take this chance and see if it could work. I'm not a video artist, but I simply gathered some stills of what I call glitch notes. And these images are screenshots of bits of score in the program Finale. And in that program, I just shove too many notes in each measure, so that you can turn off, put the notes that are too many for like a 4/4 bar, just push them into the next measure. I turned that off so that they just got more and more full, and put 128th notes. And so what you see is almost, it gets very blurry. And if you make a score page of 10 instruments, then you've got a lot of these blurry lines. And so kind of fun, I thought. And I've used them before to make a flyer. But now I thought, hey, I can put this in another program and make a whole catalog of colors. So it's essentially the same still image, and then spending endless time trying to make different colors, and then putting them into a video program, in this case, DaVinci Resolve, and layering them up and putting different transitions. So this is the third one that I've done now for Streamlines 2. So it's quite different from the actual video mergers transitions. It's a different way of working.
Christina, it's been fascinating speaking to you about the compositions on the program uh, for Bode Electrons 2022. But can we take a step back and speak about you as composer, the composition processes that interest you? What are the triggering factors that inspire you to compose? Does it come naturally? Is it hard work? Let's speak about your composition process in more holistic terms, please.
That's of course an all-encompassing subject, no, for all makers. Yeah, thinking about it very generally. I've always liked to make things. When I was a kid, I've always liked to make things. Yeah, whether they were projects for school, but physically hands-on, so craft type things. I wasn't so much interested in making music except doing piano lessons, which I didn't like. So that came really much later. Came much later, and yeah, maybe I've told you this before. When I was 21, I really chose for music, and then many years after that, went and studied composition. But I was at 21 interested in improvising, so that was new, and I knew nothing about it, and had never been someone who just messed around on the piano without notes in front of me. So that was kind of sea change, and that aspect I worked on in various ways through the years, also to make money playing for dance. But at a certain point, I got another moment of transition, and that was, I thought, I don't want to write function. I don't want to make or improvise functional music. I want to write autonomous music. That has its own thing. So not being dictated by much as I love dance, but by the dancers' movements, rhythms, needs. Thought I just want to make it from scratch. So that was very new. And yeah, what are the subjects? Been a lot of visual subjects. I love visual art. That always very often is the starting point that one chooses and feels very strong about. Oh, this is it. I'm going to dissect this and whatever. And it turns out to be more subjective perception that one finds inspirations by just looking at it, or maybe a book. I've not done that much about of written word. Having said that, I do love vocal music. I love vocal music. Haven't done it in quite a long time, but would very much love to do that again. And theatrical things. Um, yeah, that would be something I would be interested in. Not on a small scale, considering the energy needed and all that. But I like it. It's sort of combining Gesamtkunst. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Dare I
Yes.
say.
At what point did you become interested in electronics? Has it always been one of the instruments in your arsenal of instruments, or was there a specific point in your career where you decided, I'd like to spend more time exploring, yeah, non-traditional instruments?
Well, to be honest, yeah, that disclavier piece I spoke of earlier, the first disclavier piece, that was because the instrument was at hand and someone said, yeah, you could write for that. And so, okay, I was already using finale just for notating pieces. But I remember at a certain point thinking, oh, electronics, oh, do I need to do that? Is that something that is part of the baggage? And yeah, just thought, let's get into it and see what it could mean in my work. And yeah, I grew to love that very much as an aspect to develop. I've always felt completely as a beginner. that has always been, sort of like Max is very difficult, and they'll never learn super collider and coding. Oh dear, no. Fascinating, all fascinating, but you need some other lives for that.
Well, yes, time, I think, is the very
Right.
valuable resource that we don't
Yeah.
have necessarily at our disposal. But looking at your work in general, so looking at when one observes different compositions, am I correct in saying that the visual arts actually play quite an important role in your creative output, either working collaboratively with visual artists or as visual stimuli as triggers and an impetus to start a new piece. Is that correct?
Not only, no, this is by chance, and again, thank you for for the experimental imagery. No, I've never done that myself. I've made sort of or used different objects to make playing implements. I did that for quite a while. Just yeah, you wanted a new sound and messing around on the piano a lot as a pianist for kind of prepared piano stuff. But no, I'm also very, very interested in nature. I wrote a trumpet piece about a small trumpet concert based on bell ringers who used to climb in the bell towers in Europe and warn the town that the war was coming, or thunder and lightning, and many of them were struck down. I found that so dramatic, and then then I go from one thing, you go to another to find material, and I ended up at bell ringers of England, and with their fantastic numbers that they, these, I don't know if you know about it. Yeah, and so I sort of made Modi from those, and so it's I think maybe what I experience is that I pretty much make a complete kind of back catalog from which to just draw from. I mean, every piece has got one folder, and well, I think we all have that, 10 different programs.
Right. Christina, thank you so much for making time to speak with us. And I do hope that we can invite you back to next year's symposium, hopefully live here in Cape Town. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, been a great experience. Looking forward. Thank you very much.